Hey there guys, and welcome to my sun-dappled studio desk. Today I wanted to give you a little look through how I keep my research journals and my studio journals for my Masters of Visual Art. I've had a few questions about this over the past few months, and so I thought today is the day I'm going to sit down and show you how I organise all my notes and my studio reflections, and then also how that relates to sketchbooks as well. So I'm going to start off with these two piles here. I have two different types of notebooks here, and you can see them here in this little card. This card I keep here on this box, which is where I store all of my journals, and I just keep it stuck on the front there to remind me of what I have. But basically, in these larger notebooks, I have two different types of notes. The first are research notes, and these are very much written notes of books that I've been reading or articles that I've been reading, actual traditional research into the literature surrounding the subject that I'm studying for my masters. So that is this pile here. It's a smaller pile, and I'll just show you how that has worked over time. So this is one of the first ones that I used in this way, and it's got notes from when I went into archives. It's got notes of books that I looked at in archives, and each page, they're all different. You can tell when I've been into archives because I write the notes in pencil because you often can't have a pen. And you can see that when I'm taking notes, I'm always putting the page number next to the note that I take as well, so that I can always trace back what it was that I was reading and what page number it was, so that if I am writing about it and I need to put it in my footnotes, I have that full reference there. So that's just a little look at how I do it. I might actually walk you through my system of keeping the notebook, because I've been a bullet journaler for a long time, and there's a lot that I've learnt from bullet journals that I think is very helpful for note taking. So if you're an artist and you're interested in research, even if you're not doing a formal degree like I'm doing, you might find this useful in terms of just keeping a track of what you're learning, what you're reading, where it came from, all of that stuff, and keeping it in such a manner that you can find it later. Because I don't know if you're anything like me, you probably have millions of sticky notes and things, or little notebooks that you've used over the years, and you don't actually know where everything is. So this might be helpful to you. So what I do, and this is a very typical bullet journal technique, is in the front I keep an index of what is in this notebook, and I actually number the pages down the bottom here, so you can see that I have numbers on the corners of each of my pages, so that I can find where things are in my written journals. So it does take a little bit more time to write those numbers on the pages, but it's really helpful once you've filled up a few of them and go together. The journals that I like to use are these Moleskine Cahiers. So I think this is the large one. It's not quite A4, but it's just a really nice size. And I really like them because they are sewn and they sit really flat. And for these kinds of notes, I like the dotted journal because it gives me a page that I can write on and see, but it's not quite lined. And I like to use dotted journals for my bullet journals and also these kinds of journals. So in the front, I have these notes with the page numbers, and these are all the references that they're referring to. So this particular journal is one that I keep in relation to methodology and epistemology and all of the nerdy stuff that you learn about philosophically and methodologically when you're doing a master's. So I read a few key texts that were quite lengthy, so there's quite a lot in this notebook, even though there are fewer books. And then I've got the page numbers that I've taken notes on those books written in the side, so that I can flip to, say, Estelle Barrett and Barbara Bolt Practices Research Approaches to Creative Arts Inquiry is page 20 to 46. And actually for some of these notes, I have taken notes, but I have also in this instance pasted in really essential information that I knew that I was going to want to look back at. So that's something else you can do also, is actually paste things into the journal if need be. So that's sort of my methodology journal. And then this one here is my current, which one is this? No, that's my studio journal. So we want this one over here. This is my current research journal. And I always put some kind of a cool picture on the front of each journal that sort of vaguely relates to what I'm studying. And I'm studying a 19th century historical artist, Louisa Ann Meredith, as part of my master's. So I've got this cool picture that I just got off the front of a magazine. And you can see here in my index, I have all these different books that I've been reading, articles, notes that I've taken in archives, just all of them with the page numbers that they refer to down the side. So you can see as you're progressing through, I've written my page numbers in, I've got my notes taken, and you can see how I've kept it all organised. And what this has been great for is it's so hard to remember what you thought about a book. And when I'm going through, when I'm reading the book, I actually use index cards a lot to write down my reflections as I'm going, just in very brief format, just to make sure I've got the core argument. So I just keep note cards around all the time. You've probably seen me put them up on my pinboard in my studio. That helps me to keep track of information. But every time I finish a text, I like to sit down and just go through and write my reflections about what I've learned. This is all archive writing, so I might just flip past that to another text. Here we go. So when I finish a book, I'll often use sticky tabs as I'm reading. And as soon as I finish, I like to go through and just go through my sticky notes and make a note of what was on that page and just what was relevant, but also my thoughts about it and how I can see that this might relate to what I write in my exegesis, which is kind of the smaller thesis that I'm working on as part of my master's of visual art. So that sort of shows you how I use these notebooks. I keep them, the notebooks just live inside these leather covers. So these are made from leather. I actually made them myself, and I have a little class on how you can learn how to do that, that you can see. I'll leave a link in the description. It's really inexpensive. It's like 10 Australian dollars to take the class. So if you're interested in learning about that, you can pop down there and have a look. But they're super simple. I just had leftover leather from, I don't know, so I think I might bought a stash of it in a garage sale once and kept it in my shed for years, and then realised that I could make these covers myself. So they're really simple. They're just a sheet of leather with elastic that can go around them, and also elastic inside that I can just slip the book in and out of. So I can always keep my current journal or a couple of them stacked in there as well, because you can put other bits of elastic inside these, and that's what I carry around with me when I am using my journals. Now this pile over here are these are what I call my research journals. So these are research notes, and you can see that's what I've got listed up here. And I have on the side of my journals, I number them so that I can keep track of which one is which when it's sitting upright in storage. And so you can see here I've got 3 research notes on the go. The studio journal is this pile here. And the studio journal is a little bit different. The studio journal is very much my reflections on my art practice and what I am researching and learning in the academic space and in the philosophical, methodological space, how that's actually coming out in the work. Now, the thing about practice-led research is that it's this cyclical process of going and doing research, finding new insights, and then returning to another phase of making. So the ideas that you have kind of unfold over time as you're making, and it's a really fascinating, interesting process, which is kind of why I started this channel, actually, to share that with people. So I have quite a few of these research journals on the go. and I've completed a fair few of them. This was the first one that I completed for my master's, and you can see here I have pictures pasted in. So this is a photograph that I took of myself with a leaf pasted in there. So these are quite creative, these journals, and they not only contain elements of research. So for this particular moment in the journal, I was investigating herbariums and my art practice in relation to herbariums and just herbarium practice in general. And so I have all kinds of things in this journal. This was a download from Melbourne University on how to make a herbarium, like to how to make one that is functional and best practice. So that all got pasted in. I also keep notes of supervision meetings in this journal so that I can keep track of what my supervisors and I are talking about in our meetings. I quite often take photographs of what's going on in the studio as well. This is from quite early on. These are some botanical paintings that I created and some botanical pressings from my herbariums of wattles that I created quite early on in my candidature. So I'm regularly sitting down with my studio journal and reflecting on what I'm making and how that's relating to what I'm researching at the time. These are actually photos of research that I did at the National Library of Australia. I went and looked at a whole bunch of beautiful books written by female botanical artists, and so these are some of my photographs that I took there that I've pasted in and written down some of my reflections. So at this stage of my candidature, I was still narrowing down what my topic was going to be about, and in the end I narrowed it down to Louisa Ann Meredith. This is one of her beautiful books that she wrote and illustrated. So, but there were many other artists that I looked at, so that research was very precious, and I came back and did a lot of reflecting on it. And then just flipping forward through a few more of those photos. They're actually photographs of a tiny notebook I keep in my handbag that I used to, I had a big idea one day when I was out and about and I didn't have any of these journals. So I have tiny little Cahiers made by Moleskine and Flipthrough that I keep in my handbag. So I just took photos of the pages and stuck them in here so that my notes would be consistent with that research. Here's some more reflection on some of the artwork that I've been making. Sometimes I will make sketches as well. This was me thinking through, I had this idea to make these sculptural installations with paper lace and dried botanicals, which many of you have probably seen in my studio at uni that I ended up making. They're a bit different to this. They're actually mounted to a wall, and but this was sort of when I was thinking through that idea. So I do sort of use it as a sketchbook sometimes, but more of a conceptual sketchbook, not really a traditional artist sketchbook that you would see with practiced illustrations, etc. Here's a couple of other illustrations of that concept a bit further along, where I've made a few of the samples and then reflected on the further ideas that I've had. So there's a very much a process of working through ideas that happens with these studio notebooks. Kyra Mantello is a beautiful First Nations artist in Australia, and someone mentioned to me that she might be an artist I might want to look at in my practice review. So she gets a post-it note in there. So you can get the idea that how I use these notebooks. And look, this has been probably the most helpful thing in terms of writing my exegesis, because what practice-led research really is about creating research outcomes that are creative, that bring new knowledge to that field via creative works and access ideas and speculations and research that perhaps couldn't be reached in another way apart from through a creative medium. So reflecting on that and capturing those thoughts in the moment is where the value of these notebooks lays when you're doing research-based artwork, because you can really, in the moment, get into what it is that you're thinking about. Even if the idea isn't fully formed, often the chrysalis is in the writing in these books, and then I can take that chrysalis and I can turn that into a really substantial research outcome, especially when I'm combining it with the information in these journals and current research from other disciplines. So that was my first research journal that I did, and it finishes up with that. And then at the back of it, I just have my confirmation presentation that I had to do 1 year into my candidature to make sure my candidature was confirmed and I move on into being a full candidate. So I did stick that in and write down other reflections that I had after that, because there was a really fulsome discussion with my whole panel at that presentation, and I wanted to capture some of that information. So that is my first year notebook. And look, it's such a beautiful record also of this whole experience. I'm really enjoying having different ways to capture the experience of doing this research masters, because it has really been one of the joys of my life to do that. So there's that was the first year notebook. This one is a notebook. This is actually my great grandmother, and she was an artist. And I just keep this book because I'm always doing a little bit of research about her. I have a painting of hers that hangs in my house, and there's more at my parents' house. So, and I just keep photographs and research that I've done about her. This is the painting that actually hangs in my hallway at home. And I initially thought perhaps I might research her as my master's, but in the end, there was just too little information for me to go on, and I think I felt more compelled to investigate the other angle of botanical artists. But that is still an area that I will continue to research as time goes on. So there was that one. This is an earlier one that I did that I started in the year before I went to uni, when I was researching for my exhibition that I had at the Art Gallery of Ballarat in 2024. So this was sort of when I started really keeping notes in this way and really starting to connect the dots between the research and the finished work. So that's an earlier one. And then this is the current one in process. So if you've been here for a while, you might recognise some of the things that are in here that I'm keeping track of. So this one is the lace cutting that I have been doing, and all the thoughts that I've had about that process and what that means and how it ties into my overall discussion, which I am about to write the lace chapter in my exegesis in a few weeks' time. So I'll be referring back to these notes in great detail, because this is the treasure trove of where all my thoughts and my original research lives, and all of the insights that I've had and the connections that I've made. This is a digital collage I did of a photograph of Louisa Ann Meredith behind some lace that I digitally scanned. I'll just do a little flip through of this one. It's just notes on supervision also. This one is lino cuts that I have made of bare trees. That's just a sample of one of the lino cuts printed on tissue paper that I pasted in there. And then my thoughts about linen and painting on linen and flax, and how that relates to the colonial agenda. Yeah, there's all kinds of things in here. This is those same botanical watercolours that I made with the pressed botanicals on top, and further thoughts that I've had. So I find there's often one iteration of a particular project in one book, and then I will come back to that is still an unfinished body of work. And what I've found is I'll often come back to it some months later, and I will have had another idea about where this project is going. So some of the ideas sort of resolve very quickly and sequentially over a small period of time, and some take longer. So that's the other reason the journals are very helpful, because I can track the evolution of my ideas and what I was thinking about and how that unfolded over time. Then I went to Scotland, and there was a whole experience I had in a forest in Scotland, which there are lots of vlogs about the work that I ended up making about that experience. But I wrote a lot about this really deep connection I had with nature in Scotland, particularly in connection with this tree. And I made a series of artworks about that too. This was about visiting my ancestors in a graveyard in Kirkliston in Scotland. And this is the little church where they are buried. And then visiting a farmhouse that belonged to my ancestors before they came out to Tasmania in the 1830s, around the time that Louisa Ann Meredith, subject of my research, also came to Tasmania. So there's that connection there for me with my family. So I wrote a lot about that and reflected on that. These are some artworks I made of, there again, a photographic collage, I suppose, installation. I don't know quite what to call them, but these are photographs that I took. Well, I didn't take them, my husband took them actually, because I'm in the photos, but he photographed me with this tree and also the beautiful waterfall, and I made frames out of plain leaves from trees in my neighbourhood, and called this project Frames of Reference because it really helped me to understand my connection to trees of European origin and why I feel so drawn to them, and how that may be connected with my genetic links to the other side of the world. So that was a whole long piece of writing about that, which I recently wrote about in my exegesis. This is me thinking through the settee that I painted, which I have a whole video on as well. And so I was just writing notes, having ideas. I actually wrote this page after I saw the piece of furniture in an antique shop, and I couldn't get it out of my head, so I had to go back and buy it, which then led me onto a whole bunch of research online about trees and roots, and that whole idea of having roots in the place where you live. And so I wrote quite a lot about that. And then these are notes that I wrote on my residency in Tasmania, which was back in January of this year, and the artwork that I made. I wrote a lot on that residency because I had so many great insights when I was in the archives, and also when I was in the studio the following week making all this artwork. Photographs of the pinboard at the residency. And this is a multi-panel painting I made, which related directly to a drawing that I had seen of Louisa Ann Meredith's in the archive. So there's I just wrote about this whole body of work in my chapter 4 that I drafted recently. And this is some photographs in the archive of that artwork that I looked at in person. The trees that I was drawing at the residency, which were really beautiful. Some more supervision notes. And then this is me trying to figure out my chapter structure for my exegesis. So this is really just a huge mind map of me thinking through all the different themes available to me and trying to narrow things down. This is me thinking through an installation of the settee with the multi-panel paintings above it, which is also in a video that I've talked about. This is me writing notes of ideas to structure the exegesis, supervision notes. This is me writing notes about learning how to make a cylinder box in a recent workshop I did. I actually have that here. So these are boxes that you often find in archives, which keep the books safe. And I learned how to make one by hand because I want to know how to make these to store some of my handmade sketchbooks in, which is an example of one of my handmade sketchbooks there, but I would obviously make it to size. So, and these were some connections I made while I was there. That's where I've left off. So that's probably enough of that one for now. But hopefully that gives you a really good idea of how the studio journal works in comparison to the research journal. They're both really essential, but they're really different. They are representative of different types of thinking and artwork. And just before I finished up, I thought I'd show you, so many of you will have seen this little notebook rocking around, which is another of my handmade leather journals. Because the other way that I work is I make my own little sketchbooks that accompany me around, particularly when I travel. So I really like this smaller size because it's very portable. And so I don't really use pre-made notebooks like these notebooks from Moleskine in my sketchbooks. I just make them myself because I actually find I get a bit of performance anxiety with sketchbooks. I don't know if anyone else feels that way. So I started making my own watercolor sketchbooks, which is what this one here is, and this one here, which is still in progress. They're actually accordion sketchbooks with fly leaves. So if you go back a few videos, you'll see me working on the collaged elements that I put in some of these as well on these fly leaves. I've just actually finished a little class, another very reasonably priced little class on how I make these sketchbooks and also how I make these very simple sketching sketchbooks out of toned paper as well that I use for sketching out in nature. So these are a series of trees that I drew in my parents' property, and it's so easy to make these, and you can tape them together and make them quite long, and then you can even at the end, when you've finished a bunch of them that you like, you can make them into a little book, which is these ones of the Scotland trees. So that's my sort of preferred method of keeping sketchbooks for actual artwork. I don't use a lot of traditional sketchbooks in my practice. I do from time to time. I'm not sure if this one's Moleskine or Sea White of Brighton. It's one or the other. I do have a couple of these watercolour sketchbooks that I have that I do work in from time to time, and I have been using this one for recently with just some swatching, playing around with ideas. There's some gouache paintings. This was a sketch I did recently in drawing oils. So I have been pulling them out a little bit more, but I don't use these nearly as much as I use the other smaller sketchbooks that I make, because I really love that I can turn them into something that's finished here. Anyway, I will leave all of the links for the classes for both the leather cover and the handmade sketchbooks in the description. And I hope that you have learnt something interesting today from my notebooks, and my studio notebooks and my research notebooks. If you've got any questions, drop them into the comments below. I'm happy to answer questions about how I use these. And yeah, have a fabulous day. I'll see you next time. Bye.